The archdevil approached the prison door from a long corridor festooned with the bones of her enemies. It was a menagerie of sorts, dedicated to the souls used to feed her powerful and still growing empire, but one that had been brought dangerously close to the brink of disaster by a single man. She thought back at the long centuries it had taken to rebuild her strength, all because of him. She reflected momentarily on her prisoner, one being who had thwarted her plans of conquest in the mortal realm. She wasn't even sure how he had managed to gain access to her homeworld of Gathos after her fall. It was said nothing could travel between the three realms, since the immortal mother had created the Amaranthine barrier. And she should know. She had tried, and failed many times to return to the land of mortals after she had been banished. "It's an intriguing riddle to be solved for another time," she said, and tapped the ornate box she held in her hand. "But this time it will be different, now that I have the proper means to lay the foundation for my return." She inserted her key into the well-worn lock of the dented and filthy cell door, and pushed it through the lock's tumbler until it settled into place with a heavy thunk. The sound echoed back the depths of the lonely passage. The doors swung open and flooded the prison cell with cold light. The prisoner released a painful gasp, but his head remained heavy on his chest. She saw him as she had left him, a trophy hanging from the wall. His wrists were shackled and spread wide by chains hammered into the stone wall behind him. He turned his head to shield his one remaining eye from the blinding light. He was not a handsome man, and worse to look at now that his face was swollen and bruised. He was bald except for a top knot that grew from the back of his head. The coils of the braided hair were frayed, tangled, and twisted. She glided forward into the cramped cell. She wore a luxurious ice-blue gown that opened at her navel and widened across her front like a plunging, wavy dagger. It was elegantly embroidered along its curvy edges. Her shapely neck rose from a fountain of white sable clasped at her throat. The bottom ruffles of the gown swished upon the thin layer of fresh blood which coated the floor. She left a trail of crimson snakes in her wake. An intricate alabaster headdress rested on her head. It blended gracefully with her long white mane of hair. The fiendish crown was made of hundreds of human bones and revealed the truth of her nature. Tiny skulls of infants dangled down her back and mingled with the long strands of her stark hair. Her headpiece clattered and knocked as the smaller pieces spun with her movements and clashed together. She wore it as if the three kingdoms of Hannah already bowed down to her as their beloved monarch, eager to pay homage to her with their very souls. And that was precisely what she intended. She moved as if part of a breeze toward a small table in the corner. It was cluttered with instruments of torture. "This mess just won't do," she said, shaking her head. She brushed the iron pincers and sharp-edged tools aside, casting them unceremoniously to the stone floor in a cacophonous clatter. She gently placed the box she carried on the table's surface. Her black nails tapped out a simple rhythm over its top. She wore gaudy rings covered in precious stones on her fingers. The facets caught the light and created a dazzling kaleidoscope of color against the walls, though the onyx stone on her left index finger refused to join the celebration of light. The stone greedily devoured the light rather than reflect it with its sisters. The angles of her face sat high on her long serpentine neck. She looked him over with dark iris-less eyes. He was helpless. His abused body shivered underneath the tatters of his once cobalt-blue robes. The cloth was now soiled and faded. The masonry of the wall he hung from was lined with deep cracks. She thought the macabre stencil of aged stone meshed very well with the sharp lines of his ruined flesh. She swept toward him, wearing a devilish grin of satisfaction. She stopped intimately close to his body and breathed in a deep draught of his stench. It was an intoxicating fragrance to her senses. She had been thrown a morsel of luck, and she intended to exploit it to the fullest of its measure. She had longed for this moment for over 1,000 years. He would serve as the leverage she needed to defeat her rivals. And he had practically showed up on a doorstep. Oh, this was rich. Her thick indigo lips parted ever so slightly as her excitement grew. She imagined the suffering he would endure when he discovered the full magnitude of her intentions. It was a just punishment for interfering with her plans of conquest so many years ago. And today was the day of reckoning. He was now her prisoner. Her gaze swept over his stretched and suspended body, which somehow still managed to resist the harsh lashes and probing cuts of her chief tormentor, the demon witch Chidepe. She lowered her head and raised playfully seductive eyes toward her unlikely benefactor. Her mocking interest was a cruel reminder of her duplicitous nature. She gripped his chin with slender fingers and forced him to look back at her. Atenos, my dear, why such a dour face? Are you not happy to see me again? She chuckled mockingly. Perhaps my flavor of hospitality is not to your liking. She moved even closer to his body and dropped her hand to glide along his quivering flesh. I'm surprised you haven't called you winged playmates to rescue you. Snap, snap, and here they come, ready to save the day. She sneered at him. But not this time and not here, for Gothos is the place where angels come to die. Athenos twisted his neck away from her and whispered out her name in a sorrowful sigh. Saga. A wicked smile played across her oversized mouth. She dragged her fingers across his tormented flesh, angling pointed nails into the dark burgundy welts already covering his body. New lines of bright red beaded on his skin. She glanced down at the 3 small beasts at her feet. The creatures feasted on the dripping life fluid of her prisoner. She kicked one to the side, and it became animated with excitement, as if her action was an acknowledgment of tenderness. The others howled back at her in earnest. I am hoping they sing a song of joyful despair to the innocents you have failed. Alas, who can understand such beasts? Nonetheless, I am forever grateful to you for coming to my home as you did. I assure you, if I could go to you on my own accord, I would have returned to your doorstep ages ago. But such fanciful ideas are no longer the way of things, and sadly, one must accept the rules of the game as they change. She took a step backward, admiring Chidipe's work. I imagine your journey here was arduous and fraught with peril, yes? Now, tell me, truthfully, you missed me, didn't you? We have such history together, do we not? Did true love finally bring you running to my door? Or was it simply the desire to lay with one not so innocent of the flesh? I would never, Atenos said. Oh, do stop with all this self-righteous dignity. The heavenly shine of your soul has dimmed. I can see that clearly enough. Atenos showed no spark of life. His body hung deflated like a condemned and forsaken man. Come now, you look disheartened. What did you expect? A parade? Her brows furrowed, and she glared intensely at the monk. You cheated when you called the angels for help and cost me centuries of accumulated mortal soul energy. I should have rivaled the power of the Great Three by now, but no, you had to interfere. You left me weak on Gothos. Do you have any idea how much favor I needed to call due just to survive? Saga brought her hands down to the edges of her open gown and traced the exposed parts of her breasts with her 2 small fingers. Her black nails traveled down to her midsection, leaving razor-thin lines of blue malice in her translucent skin. But survive I did. She giggled. How bitter I must sound. One must play their part, and I do so love mine. Isn't that what you preach? All things in their natural way, or some such nonsense? Saga played absent-mindedly with the blood that bubbled up from the cuts. It was one of her favorite pastimes. She drew a blue line across his cracked lips, then licked her fingers clean, one by one. She savored every drop. Her wounds closed immediately,